We've been in captivity for 400 years. We've been denied our heritage, our land, what rightfully belongs to us as a people.
David Anderson and Francine Graham were both found dead after that hours-long standoff with police. Sources telling us that Anderson was a one-time follower of the Black Hebrew Israelites, a fringe group labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
You got another one. Go ahead, get that one right there. Y'all got one right here. That's what I'm talking about as a couple. Keeping the boots of the prophets of the Lord.
Somebody help him.
Push on up.
One time we were over there and they had the charts up.
The tribe of Naphtali, that's Argentina and Chile, that's the rest of South America.
Come on, Pop, you know that ain't right. He said, of course, Danny, I know that's not right. He said, but that's the hook. That's how we get them into place, and we wire them up to what's true.
In the last video, we covered the common arguments concerning Deuteronomy 28:68 as evidence that blacks are the Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you do so before going into this next video, as we will continue addressing more arguments concerning this passage. As you may have guessed by now, Deuteronomy 28:68 is used to support the ideology that this event was a prophecy about blacks and the transatlantic slave trade, solely based on the words slave, ships, and sold. During the last video, we addressed the context of that passage, but this next particular argument insinuates that in 1619, God chose to curse the people of Israel for their transgressions against him by sending them into slavery for a period of 400 years, which they call their quote captivity. This is a period that was supposed to last until 2019, but officially over in 2020 because of their supposed 1 year of completion, in which the second Exodus would take place where black Israelites would migrate to Africa. There's so much to unpack with these claims, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'll start by addressing each point. Hebrew Israelites believe that Genesis 15:13 is the first mention of the 400-year prophecy, which pertains to their claims that it is in reference to the transatlantic slave trade. The text reads, "Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions." This passage was fulfilled in Exodus chapter 12 verses 35 and 36. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. If the 400-year prophecy was completed in the year 2020, we clearly see that those who have made these claims are still here and have not left America with great possessions as stated in the Bible. Hebrew Israelites believe the nation mentioned is America, not Egypt. And with this logic, this has to be referring to them since they're the descendants of slaves and the biblical Israelites were not in Egypt 400 years. This argument is based on YouTube videos and pseudo-internet scholars, not scripture and reliable sources. Let's play opponent's advocate for a second. If we're being technical with our timelines, blacks were not enslaved for 400 years as well. According to their starting point for the transatlantic slave trade in 1619 to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which abolished slavery in the United States, thus making slavery illegal, gives you only a span of 244 years, leaving the prophecy 156 years short of the 400. The next argument is concerning Jim Crow and segregation in the South as a form of captivity. This is such a fallacious argument and exhibits that those making the argument have no clear understanding what captivity means. They also don't seem to be aware of black slaves who are allowed to migrate to Liberia, which was a United States territory at the time, in the 1820s to 1864. The idea for blacks to start considering this move once again was later resurrected by Marcus Garvey in the 1920s. So if being in America at this time was a form of captivity, the United States had a poor way of enforcing it after the Emancipation Proclamation. Next, it is estimated that over 6 million blacks moved from the South to the northern and Midwestern states between 1916 and 1970. In a 2005 article by the New York Times, they state, since the 1990s, more people from Africa have sought residence in the United States than African slaves being brought to America by force. So this begs the question, if blacks are under captivity in America, then why are Africans and other immigrants seeking residence in America? But I digress. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 15. This is clearly speaking of the time that the Israelites were in Egypt from the time of Joseph till Moses. This is backed up by scriptures such as Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 and 41. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. This is reiterated by Stephen in the book of Acts, as he is appealing to the council before he was stoned. And God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners in a land belonging to others, who would enslave them and inflict them for 400 years. But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God. And after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. Notice that Stephen was speaking as if this is a past event, not a future one. Stephen later goes into the history of the Israelites, which includes the 400 years they spent in Egypt. This is also confirmed in Paul's letter to the Galatians. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say, and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. This is what I mean. The law, which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to make the promise void. For if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham by a promise. So the scriptures are clear that the Israelites were in the land of Egypt 400 years. To question it would be to question the sufficiency of Scripture. Another common rhetorical question asked by the Hebrew Israelites is, when were the Israelites taken back to Egypt on ships? Again, this is under the assumption that the Israelites were forcefully brought back to Egypt. But as stated in the last video, the Israelites will go back to Egypt because of the harsh conditions in Israel to sell themselves to the Egyptians. This corresponds with Hosea chapter 8 verses 13 and 14. As for my sacrificial offerings, they sacrifice meat and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. They shall return to Egypt. For Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces, and Judah has multiplied fortified cities. So I will send a fire upon his cities, and it shall devour her strongholds. This is also corroborated in Jeremiah chapter 43 verse 7. And they came into the land of Egypt, for they did not obey the voice of the Lord, and they arrived at Tahpanhes. This clearly answers the question of when did the Israelites go back to Egypt on the account of Deuteronomy 28:68. The book of Deuteronomy is strictly concerning the people of Israel as they are preparing to enter the land the Lord is giving them. So this is why the narrative that chapter 28 has anything to do with future events concerning blacks in America is fallacious. For instance, verse 8 is very specific that this is strictly concerning the land. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake, and he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Followed by verse 11. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground, within the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. And when we jump to verse 15, we see the warnings for the people if they disobey what is being spoken to them before they enter the land. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. For those who are still not convinced, let's take a look at a few verses and see if any of these things happened to blacks during the time of the transatlantic slave trade. The Lord will make the rain of your land powder. From heaven, dust shall come down on you until you are destroyed. First point, there's no recorded time where black slaves worked during a drought of biblical proportions. And since blacks were slaves, they didn't possess any land. And if they didn't possess any land for the Lord to strike, then this prophecy cannot be about them. It must be concerning the Israelites of the Bible during that time. Second point, Deuteronomy 28:53. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and in the distress with which your enemies shall distress you. Again, this is not recorded in black history where slaves ate their children because of a severe famine. However, it is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 6 verses 25 through 31. Now as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" And the king asked her, "What is your trouble?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. On the next day I said to her, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she has hidden her son." When the king heard the words of the woman, he tore his clothes. Now he was passing by on the wall, and the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth beneath on his body. And he said, "May God do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elijah, the son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today." For those who aren't aware of the Hebrew Israelite movement, this isn't the first time they've made false prophecies that didn't come to pass. In fact, those of us who are old enough to remember, in the 90s they pushed a narrative that the world was going to end by thermonuclear destruction by the year 2000 and Christ was going to return.
These places that's going to be hit in this thermonuclear war is America. America's going to be wiped off the face of the planet Earth. That's going to take place before the year 2000. That's right. America has less than 628 days before this country is taken out in thermonuclear destruction.
This kingdom, America, is going to be destroyed before the year 2000.
Evil kingdom that God spoke of in the Bible. And all you so-called white people, your condemnation, you are condemned to what? Hell. And you're going to be in hell, you're going to be oppressed before the year 2000. Christ is going to come back.
Museum America is going to be destroyed before the year 2000 by thermonuclear destruction.
Needless to say, that was over 20 years ago at the time of this video, and Christ hasn't returned. So it is not surprising the 400-year prophecy claims haven't been fulfilled, although it's been a full year after their year of completion. The claims were, as mentioned earlier, there will be a second Exodus where blacks would be moving back to Africa while America would be facing destruction, and God will finally hear their prayers. Since Hebrew Israelites claim to be the people of the book, we would expect they would have read their own text concerning false prophets in Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 20 through 22. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. We clearly see how prophesying falsely is a very serious charge in the Most High's eyes. So serious that in ancient times, such a person was commanded to be put to death. Even Paul belabored this point with his letter to the Galatians. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said it before, and now I say it again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. In conclusion to this part of the video series, we now see how once again Deuteronomy 28:68 cannot be referring to blacks in the transatlantic slave trade, let alone a 400-year prophecy concerning blacks in America. Again, blacks own no land for the Lord to afflict, as mentioned in verse 8. The land they worked was owned by the oppressors. But if the land, owned by the oppressors, was afflicted by the Lord, then according to their logic, the oppressors would be a part of the curses as well. And if that's the case, would they be considered Israelites if they were affected by the curses? We have to be careful when making claims that someone or we ourselves are under a curse of God. You're basically saying Christ's work on the cross wasn't efficient for anyone's salvation, since a person is cursed based on their skin color or lineage, which they had no control over. This of course goes against Scripture, since salvation is a gift to those who believe, no matter their ethnicity. Galatians 3:13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. John 1:12 and 13, but to all who did receive him, all believed in his name. He gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. In the next video, we will be discussing the Israelite DNA tracking claims and answering the question, can a person be identified as an Israelite through their DNA?